Just because it's President's Day doesn't mean John McMullen joins us as he does every day here on 97.3 ESPN.com. Josh Hedrick, Deshaun Hendricks filling in for Mike Gill and Pete Thompson. And John joins us like he does every day at this time, 4 o'clock, Monday through Friday on the Sports Bash, 97.3 ESPN. John, how you doing today?
Doing well. Thanks for having me, guys.
So I wanted to start off with the interesting news that came out this morning. It's actually been a kind of a slow news day overall for the NFL, but interesting, it came out this morning that Pederson is interviewing today Deuce Staley and Mike Groh for the OC position. This is after a few days ago he talked about the possibility, different options he's going through and the possibilities of whether he's going to have an offense coordinator, maybe have, one guy be the passing coordinator, the other guy be the running coordinator, all these different options he's talked about, and all of a sudden he's going through the process of the offensive coordinator interview. Do you think this was the plan all along, John, or do you think Pederson has been kind of mulling different options in his mind all along?
Well, I think he's been mulling different options, but you kind of knew at some point both Mike Groh and Deuce Staley were going to get interviews for the position. The only question is, are they ready to take that next step in Doug's mind? It's pretty clear from the way Doug has handled this that he has a lot of respect for Frank Reich and for what he did for him and what he did for the organization. And I think a lot of people looked at that and said, Doug calls the plays, what's the big deal of losing Frank Reich? But I think you're kind of seeing it. He's not completely comfortable with just elevating someone. So he's going through his due diligence and looking at people outside, inside the organization. And ultimately, he said he might not even hire an offensive coordinator. I don't think that's the way to go. I don't like that kind of setup. And ultimately, we'll see how Doug goes. But as I wrote today on 973ESPN.com, and you mentioned, Josh, it could be a situation where you have a running game coordinator, passing game coordinator, and a senior offensive analyst with some sort of experience building an offense. That's a possibility as well.
Speaking of offensive analysts, there's a guy that you mentioned specifically at 97.3 ESPN.com that I thought was a very interesting name and a guy that I think people have overlooked about his influence in the Eagles offense this year.
Yeah, that's Trent Miles. I think a lot of people don't even know he was with the organization. They kind of added him very, very quietly. He's a former head coach at the college level, not big-time colleges, but Indiana State, Georgia Southern. So he's got a history of running a team, running an offense. And if you look at, obviously, how this team relied and leaned on run-pass options to get sort of that college mindset in there, I think it was very helpful. And I think if Doug goes the route of say, elevating Mike Groh to passing game coordinator, Deuce to running game coordinator, and he wants to stay in-house, that senior analyst, so to speak, it could be Miles.
John, you look at overall the Eagles offense without Frank Reich, without John DeFilippo, the longest tenured guy now left on the offensive staff of the name guys is Deuce Staley. This is a guy who actually interviewed for the head coaching position before Doug Pederson. And John, I contend that if you're going to promote one of those guys up, it should be Deuce, because I think that there's a lot of players on this team and around the league who have a lot of respect for Deuce and look at him as not just a guy who they can listen to, but as a guy who can lead them.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think that's one of the issues Doug is having, because if you look around the league at offensive coordinators and you look at how they got to that position, it's generally the same way, and it's usually being a college coordinator, being maybe a quarterback coach, being a quarterback in college, as Mike Groh was. So from that standpoint, it's not traditional to make the leap from running backs coach to offensive coordinator. There's only one in the entire NFL right now that did that, and that's Eric Bieniemy in Kansas City, and this will be his first year. Because, as you know, in back-to-back seasons, you have Doug Pederson, Matt Nagy getting head coaching positions, and sort of Andy Reid's going deep into his cupboard. So from that standpoint, I think that's where you have the dragging of the feet. And the question is, does Deuce have enough experience in doing the things that Frank Reich did? Building an offense, understanding how to put together a plays. And Doug always talks about it. You know, what the Eagles like to do is run similar formations and have different options as far as plays. So it might be a pass play out of the same formation, a running play, a screen, and then you build out from there. Deuce has never done that. Mike Groh has done it a little bit, but they both don't have a ton of experience. But when you look at Groh, as I said, son of a coach, ex-quarterback, has coached quarterbacks, usually that's the traditional route you take to offensive coordinator.
John, couldn't I argue that, yeah, it's a traditional path, but the players in the locker room maybe have more respect for Deuce than Mike?
Well, the players have a ton of respect for both. I don't think that's an issue. When I talk about leadership, it's very important everywhere, but that starts with the head coach, and I think that's a bigger part of the job than people realize, because we always talk about X's and O's. And I think maybe the most impressive part of Doug Pederson has been the way he's handled personalities, not only in the locker room, now he's got to do it on the coaching staff. That's very important for that position. When you're talking about coordinators and putting together an offense or even a defense, it's more to do with the X's and O's. You're not going to be asked upon to lead this team. Obviously, as the boss of the players, you have to be somewhat of a leader, but that comes from Doug Pederson. So it's got to be more of the X's and O's expertise from the coordinator position.
Talk with John McMullen, our 97.3 ESPN.com Eagles insider. Follow him on Twitter at JFMcMullen. Also go to 97.3 ESPN.com and the 97.3 ESPN mobile app to read all of his work on the website. John, sticking with the Eagles for a little bit more, I want to ask you, because you mentioned about Pederson and the offense, with Frank Reich and John DeFilippo not being here, how do you think the offense will look different? Because we know on a lot of other teams, you look at the Falcons when they lost their offensive coordinator. You look at other teams around the league. When they lose coordinators, it does seem to affect the team the next year. But it's a little different with the Eagles because Pederson is the play caller. So what differences could you see in 2018 that would be different than other teams?
Well, I think, and Doug has admitted this, because the job of a head coach is so great as far as sort of ancillary things that people often don't think about, whether it's media responsibilities, whether, as I said, it's dealing with disciplinary action for a potential player, keeping guys on the same page in the locker room. It's really a big job. And Doug let it slip when he was on Mike Krzyzewski's show last week. He called the plays, but Frank built the game plan. And I don't think a lot of people realize that. That's because Doug was so busy during the week, and they trusted each other, and it was a good collaborative relationship. And certainly Doug tweaked whatever he wanted to tweak, but Frank was doing a lot of the heavy lifting from week to week as far as putting together these game plans. Now you have a situation where I think it's pretty clear that Doug's not going to have the same confidence, at least right away, in whoever has this job as he had in Frank Reich, and understandably so. Frank's a veteran coach. They've been together for 2 years. They've developed that relationship. He had been a coordinator before. So it's going to be a work in progress, and I think at least early on, Doug's going to put more on his own plate, and we'll see how he's able to handle it.
John, looking at overall at the Eagles' offseason, will Pederson's decision-making with the staff have any effect on what they do in the front office, considering that a lot of the players who had success for the Eagles this year, they seem to be perfect fits for what Pederson and the team were doing?
Yeah, I mean, you'd love to bring everybody back. You always would when you win a Super Bowl, but that's just not reality. You can't. Guys are going to get overpaid, especially sort of players that maybe were backups here, but other teams could potentially look at starters. The first two names always come are Bo Allen and Trey Burton, because I think they're going to get paid like starters in this league. And if that's the case, well, the Eagles can't bring them back. It's as simple as that. And that's part of the Super Bowl attrition everybody goes through. From the coaching standpoint, we've already seen it, in that you lose Frank Reich and John DeFilippo before the 1 week Super Bowl anniversary. And from that standpoint, you got to consider yourself lucky, because Jim Schwartz should have gotten a job, to be honest, and he'll be back. So that's good, but it's difficult to repeat in this league, and one of the reasons why is because when you win a Super Bowl, everybody wants a piece of you, not only on the field as far as chasing you, but they want to copy what you did to have that success. Whether it's talent, whether it's scheme, whether it's coaching, you're going to see it all.
John, Bill Polian was on a lot of ESPN outlets today and had some interesting comments with a lot of the things he said. But let's start with one of the things he said in our own backyard about the Eagles and Nick Foles, saying multiple ones and multiple twos would be what it had to take if he was Eagles GM. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, Peter King said multiple ones as well. I mean, the Eagles can afford it because Carson Wentz is still on his rookie deal. So they can afford to bring the band back together at the quarterback position if they like. My point to this, my twist is that Nick Foles will never have a greater value than he has right now. And that's to the point. You're talking about a former GM in this league talking about multiple ones and multiple twos. You have Peter King talking about multiple ones. Hey, look what Jimmy Garoppolo got. Not the money. He got the Patriots got a second-round pick. And I got news for you. Jimmy Garoppolo has a much, much higher ceiling than Nick Foles. And all due respect that he's coming off a Super Bowl win, that's just the reality. The Eagles are a very good football team. If you can get multiple ones, you better trade Nick Foles. I do not agree with Polian or Peter King. I would be stunned if the Eagles got an offer of multiple ones. But while I say that, I never thought they'd get a number one pick for Sam Bradford, and Howie Roseman was able to do that. So there's a lot of desperation at that position. And teams, look, there's a lot of bad organizations. And by that, I mean, look, you have to remember what Nick was in a lesser situation. And he has a ceiling as a player. And you do have to build up around him. And he proved without a shadow of a doubt, if there's a very good team around him, he can win at least in a short window, as he needed to do here with the Eagles. So he deserves credit for that. But I think most, and certainly most good organizations realize he's got a ceiling as a player, and it's not nearly as high as, say, someone like Jimmy Garoppolo. And as I mentioned, he only got a second-round pick coming back.
John, I don't know how much draft homework you've done so far, but Polian made waves also by talking about Lamar Jackson and basically saying that he's a wide receiver. It basically made a lot of people kind of look the other way. Not that Lamar Jackson's the best quarterback in this class or anything, but the fact that he just dismissed him so quickly as a quarterback before he even got to step foot on the combine, at least.
Yeah, that's a bit of an overstatement. I mean, in a lot of ways, and Bill's an old school guy, and I see it all across the NFL. I mean, they don't like any quarterback coming out because they don't like spread quarterbacks. And the reality of the situation is you either coach them up or you say everybody should go play wide receiver. Because if you're looking for Peyton Manning, who can go from progression 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, those guys don't exist anymore. The closest would be a Carson Wentz type who played in a pro-style offense at North Dakota State. So you either go the way the Rams did with Jared Goff and try to maximize the potential of these college quarterbacks coming in who have significant holes. There's no doubt about that. Or you can cry about it and say, I wish I had Peyton Manning. We all wish we had Peyton Manning. Those types of quarterbacks aren't coming out of college. As far as Jackson, I mean, he does have accuracy issues, and he is a tremendous athlete, and that's where people start talking about changing position. A lot of quarterbacks couldn't change positions. But as far as he goes, no, he's had too much success, and there's too much there. There will be somebody willing to give him an opportunity. And from there, obviously, it's on his plate what he does with that opportunity.
Yeah, I agree. And when I looked at it, it was his comments about Jackson's size and Jackson being too small, yet Jackson was listed as 6'3", 222. I do definitely agree with you with the fact that Jackson has accuracy issues. But my thing was, what quarterback in this class doesn't have any type of issues, just how you alluded to with the whole spread concept and how no one is really playing a traditional offense anymore. My last question on Jackson is basically, he has had strides the last couple years as a passer. Do you believe that he is a day one talent, though, at the quarterback position?
Day one, well, the old school NFL way of thinking is day one is 1 through 3. So I have to ask you to clarify.
Round one. Round one.
Now is only round one. I don't think he's a first round pick. I do think he's a potential second round pick. And part of the reason why I don't think he's a first round pick is because this group is very, very deep at the quarterback position, and there are going to be a number of guys that go in the hell. You're going to have at least 3 in the top 10. And all of a sudden, you start looking at other guys who maybe would be in the late first round in other years getting pushed down a little bit. I think that's his biggest issue, and the reason I have him right now going to the second round. But you mentioned it's very, very early in the process. We haven't even gotten to the combine. We haven't gotten pro days. That kind of stuff's going to change because he's going to be able to show. And if he shows himself to be a tremendously gifted physical prospect, you mentioned his size. If he does list at 6'3", 222, if he does show top-tier NFL arm strength, we all know his athleticism, then all of a sudden he can start moving up the board. But when you talk about Darnold, you talk about Josh Rosen, and guys like that at the top, I don't think he's in that category.
One more draft question, John. Saquon Barkley, I've been very high on him all year. Some people are starting to chatter that Cleveland could take him at 1 and then take a quarterback of whoever falls to them at 4. Do you think that's wise given Cleveland struggles at that position?
No, and I don't think this is a new Cleveland Browns. If you're telling me Sashi Brown and Paul Podesta, yeah, I could see them doing that. But this is John Dorsey, and this is Scott McClugan being in there. No, they understand they need a quarterback, and it depends, obviously, how they want to go about it. They could go get Cousins, for instance, and that changes the whole trajectory of the draft. But if they do want to go draft-wise and they do want to go in that direction, they're taking a quarterback at number 1. They know, John Dorsey knows how important that position was. And I argued it last year. I said the same thing. Myles Garrett might turn into Bruce Smith. it still doesn't mean as much as a quarterback. The value of that particular position is so much higher than everywhere else. And we've been through it again and again. That's why Sashi Brown's unemployed, because you can't pass up on all the quarterbacks they passed up, starting with Carson Wentz, obviously, over the past 2 years, though.
John, speaking of Kirk Cousins, reports came out earlier today that the Jets are going to do whatever it takes to get Kirk Cousins. And I've always said, John, that whether it's the Jets, whether it's the Browns, whether it's the Vikings, whether it's the Cardinals or the Broncos, listen, they may all want him, but it all ultimately comes down to is, what does Kirk Cousins want, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you could want him all you want, and you could be willing to pay upwards of $1 more than everybody else. But if he wants to play, for instance, with a contender, and he wants a real shot to win, well, then he's probably going to look at Denver first, or Minnesota, as you mentioned, if they are interested. If it's just about the money, then you got to look at, things like taxes. I mean, one of the reasons the Eagles lucked out and got Doug Pederson as their head coach is because Adam Gase wanted to go in Florida. There's no state taxes there. And if you're in New York in a high tax state, well, you got to pay a lot more than maybe a team in a state where there isn't a ton of taxes. So all of that comes into it. I think Kirk has made enough money over the past 2 years on the franchise tag that he's not just going to be highest payday. Ultimately, I think he wants to be able to compete at a high level. And to me, that points towards Denver, because I really don't think the Vikings are going to have interest in paying him.
If wherever Cousins goes, let's say he doesn't go to the Jets, how does that affect the Jets quarterback situation? Because they do have a high draft pick, and the list of guys after Kirk Cousins doesn't exactly scream franchise quarterback. Like, Tyrod Taylor is a good quarterback. He doesn't turn the ball over, but there's nothing about his game in Buffalo that screams franchise quarterback. Sam Bradford's got the injury issues. Case Keenum, he is what he is. Teddy Bridgewater, he is what he is. A.J. McCarron, I mean, he's been sitting behind Andy Dalton of all people. So, do the Jets go exclusively draft, or do you think they get another bridge quarterback like a Josh McCown in there for if they don't get Kirk Cousins?
Well, I think if they go draft and they don't get a Cousins, I think they bring McCown back because they like him a lot. And he would be the perfect sort of mentor for a young quarterback. And he could even start the season and slowly, morph away. If whoever they get, whether it's Baker Mayfield, Josh Allen, somebody of that nature, if they seem ready, he would not be the type of guy that's going to make waves. So I do think it's sort of you always need more than one plan. Their plan A is probably Cousins. Their plan B is to go draft and bring Josh McCown back.
He is John McMullen on 97.3 ESPN.com, Eagles Insider. You can follow him on Twitter at JF McMullen on Twitter. Of course, check out all of his work at 97.3 ESPN.com. John, hope you enjoy the rest of your day. And don't worry, Mike and Pete will be back in the saddle tomorrow.
Hey, thank you guys. Enjoyed it.